In this video, we are going to use VNTR analysis to solve a case in a murder mystery TV show. In this episode of The Office, the American Murder Mystery, we see Andy Bernard enjoying his evening watching television, when suddenly a hooded individual breaks in with a knife and tries to take a swing at Andy. Andy gets cut, but quickly takes the lampshade and smashes it over the intruder's head, causing them to flee from the apartment. Andy calls the police, and they begin their investigation immediately. They gather DNA samples from multiple splotches of blood they find on the floor and couch area and send it back to the lab for analysis. At the lab, they subject the retrieved samples to VNTR amplification, which amplifies the samples and cuts them into short tandem repeats of varying lengths between individuals. Here are the results of the amplification and electrophoresis of the samples. We examine two loci to make sure that we accurately ascertain the identity of the culprit. Thus, we have two gels. Now let's do some analysis. Here we have the victim's DNA and the crime scene DNA, as well as the DNA samples of four different suspects. We have Gabe Lewis, from whom Andy stole his girlfriend, Jessica, and one of Andy's ex-girlfriends, Suzanne Lewis, Gabe's devoted mother, and Dwight Schrute, head salesman at Dunder Mifflin. We start with VNTR locus 1 and then move on to locus 2 if we have a match in the first locus. In order to consider a suspect as the culprit, each suspect must match up with all of the bars in the crime scene sample, each of which represents an allele of that locus. Starting with the victim, he does not match up for either allele, so we can easily discount him from the process. Next, we go to Gabe, who, as we see, matches with the crime scene sample locus in locus 1, so we then move on to locus 2. We do not consider the victim since he did not match the crime scene sample in locus 1. As we can see here, Gabe does match up with the alleles in locus 2 for the crime scene sample, so we can consider him in the process of finding the culprit. For Jessica, in locus 1, none of her alleles match up with the crime scene, so she can be reasonably discounted from the process. Notice that in locus 2, her alleles do match up with the crime scene DNA, but because her alleles do not match in locus 1, she is still not considered. Suzanne does not match with the crime scene sample, but she does match with Gabe for at least one of his alleles on each loci, which makes sense since the mother donates at least one allele from each loci to her child, resulting in the partial match between these two suspects. And finally, the last suspect, Dwight. He does have a match for the alleles on the crime scene sample in locus 1, but his alleles do not match in locus 2. Thus, we have a good idea of who the suspect might be for the next episode. In the next episode, we discover that we are correct in our assumption, and Gabe is the culprit. It turns out that Gabe wanted to exact revenge upon Andy for quote-unquote stealing his girlfriend Erin and thought to murder him. So into the brig with Gabe.